Alrighty. And for those of you that want to follow along with the resource that is in the chat, um, this is what we're going to be following along with. Now, once we have the recording for this webinar, we're actually going to embed it into this resource. I will, once that recording is ready, I'll actually email it out to you and let you know that it's ready. And so it'll be embedded into this resource. And so everything you have here, you can follow along with. Now, there is some additional information that I have in my slides. I'm also going to send the PDF of the slide deck. So not to worry if there's something that you don't see on the slides, that you don't see on the resource that's on the slides. I did just add a little, I created the resource, and as I was kind of refining the slides, I added a few things. So I will share with you the slides as well. And there's something that obviously you can use as a guide if you're introducing 16 types on Cloverleaf to a group. This is where we're at, and this also has some great ability to kind of jump around when you're going through it again. After you can kind of say, well, I just kind of want to actually learn that part. You can actually click on these areas and it'll take you right to that part in the resource. So that's what we're working on right now. Let's get started. For those of you that just joined, my name is Stephanie Licata. I'm a senior learning strategist with Cloverleaf. I've been using Cloverleaf since 2019 and been using many of these assessments that are on Cloverleaf for over a decade. I'm super excited to be here and also to be sharing a little bit with you about 16 types. So I'm going to also share with you, if those of you who've been in my webinars before, you know that I love the Cloverleaf difference. And this is also for you to listen as a person to also help educate people about how to be able to actually leverage Cloverleaf in the best way possible. So many people that you've been working with, that you may be working with 16 types, they've probably taken 16 types before, right? I first took 16 types when I was a senior in high school, right? So most people have taken this assessment before and they've had a certain experience with it. So I'm going to give you that Cloverleaf difference language so you have it. Then we're going to do a very high level 16 types overview. I'm going to break each preference down, and I'm also going to share an area for development for each preference as well. I'll also just mention the thinking styles comparison as well. I'll also go through specifically different team dynamics, right, that you are going to see on Cloverleaf when you're looking at 16 types. So if you look at the resource here, I'm going to give you, I'm going to focus a lot on how to deal with certain teams where you have balanced trends, right? And then also where you have more diverse trends, right? Where you have more of a high end of a group of people that are, maybe 80% perceiving, 20% judging, similar to that. So that's really, how we're gonna kind of work through it. I'll do a lot of teamwork as we're going through this. Okay. So as you know, the Cloverleaf difference is one of my favorite things to talk about. In most cases, people have taken this assessment before, they've debriefed it in a workshop, and then what do they do after that, right? Nobody's walking around with their 16 types reports to learn how to interact with people. So at Cloverleaf, we really talk about how you can use the Cloverleaf insights throughout the employee lifecycle, from being able to show a new hire that this is something that you invest in your people with, to being able to integrate it into onboarding. For those of you also that want to be able to get some of the resources to illustrate how this integration happens, I do want to draw your attention to our Help Center, which actually has this learning resources section. And I'm actually going to pop this in the chat right now. I strongly suggest that you bookmark this because this actually has a ton of information about different exercises and ways you can integrate Cloverleaf into a bunch of different people processes. So there's a webinar section here where the resource for today is found, and all of these also have videos embedded in them. So we talk about how Cloverleaf can be embedded into these processes, into enhancing goal setting, performance, and project management. We have recognition exercises that you can use with Cloverleaf. We also have, there's ways that you can have career development conversations, and there's exercises, templates, step-by-step stuff, all in that learning resources center. And yes, even when we're separating, even when someone is leaving a team, we can actually look at some of their Cloverleaf profile and say, where do we need to shift this role to be able to make it more effective, make the next person more effective? How do we articulate that in the job description, right? And so we really talk about the Cloverleaf effect having impact, right? That it focuses on the entire person. It makes the assessments actionable and it's scalable across a large organization. So as we narrow it down, one of the most popular assessments that many people have taken and have heard of is, of course, 16 types. 16 types typically takes 8 to 10 minutes to take. And 16 types really helps people discover their own strengths, as well as understand how others may be different. Now, 16 types was designed in the field of psychology, right? And it really is more about self-awareness to get a greater understanding of why do I act, think, organize, respond, consume information the way I do, right? And how do other people maybe act, think, consume, understand, organize things in a different way than I do, right? So how do I do that? How does that happen? And how does it differ from other people as well? Right. So when you're in an organization, right, and information gathered through these assessments really helps you understand your different team members' strengths, their opportunities for growth. It also understands how they help them understand how they perceive information, how do they process and consume information, right? And this also allows you to better understand their work style, how to then maybe set expectations around their work style, and also to balance strengths and challenges, strengths and weaknesses on a team, right? So, for example, if you really had a project that needed a lot of organization and attention to detail, you're probably not going to put a group of P's together to handle that, right? You might have some P's on in that group, but you want some J's in there as well, right? To be able to balance that out. So when you're using 16 types as part of a team building, it can help coworkers determine how best to approach peer-to-peer communication. It can add value to manager-employee interactions, right? So if I'm a high J and I've got a person on my team that is a high P, we completely look at managing information in life differently, right? And so it's really important that I understand where my direct report is coming from, because there's a big difference in how we approach managing life, right? And managing work, right? So it can also improve our own self-awareness, and it can also enhance leadership development as we look at leaning into our strengths and as we look at how do we expand on those opportunities for growth. How can we be a better leader of our teams and in our organization? So how do you decipher your 16 types results? So this is a little bit like train the trainer, right? So if you're going to help someone decipher their 16 types results, right? On Cloverleaf, you have the advantage of seeing your own results, but also looking at your team results. So I'm going to be popping in and out of Cloverleaf as well. The 16 types assessment is based on Carl Jung's theory of psychological types. The results are broken down into 4 categories. We know them: extrovert or introvert, sensing or intuitive, feeling or thinking, judgment or presumption. So the assessment places you in a 4-letter acronym category. There's no right or wrong types or styles. And the assessment is intended to be a way to think about your behaviors and how they might be perceived by others. So the purpose of the 16 types assessment, or really any personality assessment, truly is that self-awareness, with the goal of really identifying the behaviors that potentially hold you back from being your best on a day-to-day basis. So each of the 16 type acronyms answers the following questions, right? And so when we get down to it, it's answering a question. The first question is around energy. Where do you draw your energy from? Alone time or in collaboration with others? So for example, many people think that just introverts are shy. And this is a stereotype and a miss sort of classification of what it really means to be an introvert. It's really about energy. And also an introvert, if they have more stake in the game, they'll speak up more, right? The difference is that the extrovert who's talking during that meeting and engaged in that meeting is going to leave that meeting and about that topic really energized and raring to go. Maybe doesn't want to stop, maybe wants to keep going. And the introvert is going to need a little rest. They're going to need some separation. They're going to be exhausted, right? If the introvert has a horse in that race, if they have that, if what they're talking about in that meeting is something important to them, it's not that they're not going to speak up. Right? It's just that they're going to use and reserve their energy wisely. If it's not something that they have a lot of energy around, they may sit back and observe. An extrovert like me will talk to a piece of toast. We don't care. Like, we'll just keep going, right? An introvert's going to really make a calculated decision about, do I want to exert energy in this area, right? Or do I want to hold back? Now, one of the things that I always tell teams is that when you are in a conversation with a combination of extroverts and introverts, and you're in a decision-making mode, and if you don't have too tight of a deadline, I always say, check in with your introverts the next day because they've had time to recharge and they might have a great idea that they didn't get in the meeting, right? The extrovert works fast. They think fast. They're like, how about this? How about that? How about this? The introvert is not spitting out ideas like that. They are very more methodical in their approach to thinking and processing. And so and when they recharge after they leave that meeting, they have a really great idea the next day. So I always say, check in with your introverts after the fact to get their perspective. Now, in the perception function, we're answering the question, how do you process and consume information? Are you more sensing or are you more intuitive? So when we're sensing, we're a little bit more logical, fact finding, and we're intuitive, we're a little bit more leaning into our gut, right? We're a little bit more sensing from our emotions or our internal sort of feelers, right? When we're sensing, we're more observing information, and when we're more intuitive, we're more observing our experience, right? And so that perception function, right, answers that question: how do you process and consume, right? Are you saying, let me see all of the facts? Or are you saying, let me see the bigger picture? Let me see what I'm sensing. What are the patterns or abstract ways that I'm observing as I process this information? Now, the judgment function, judgment preference, answers the question, how do you make decisions and take action based on the information that you have? So the perception is, how do you take it in and how do you sort of decipher it? And the judgment is now the next step. Now that based upon how you've consumed it, how do you make that decision? Do you rely first on your heart or your head? Are you more of a feeler or are you more of a thinker? Now, there's another misconception here. Oh, people that are thinkers, they're just like making these cold, hard decisions on facts, and feelers are, all they care about is emotions. Those are very extreme stereotypes. The thinker is going to go to the facts first for the source of the decision. It doesn't mean they're going to completely ignore people's feelings or emotions. It's just they're going to lean into the fact, more logical perspective, and the feeler may have more emphasis on how does this decision impact people. What is going to be the fallout of this decision? It doesn't mean that the feeler also is ignoring the facts. So we want to really be careful about not putting people in extreme boxes in these areas. It's just where our preference is to lean in this direction. These are about preferences. It's not about boxed in categorizing, right? Our preference usually tends to, most of the time, lean in this preference. It doesn't mean we don't have the capacity to also see the other perspective. Now, the orientation preference is about how you manage your life and work. Do you manage it more with structure or more spontaneity? Are you more of a judger or a perceiver? Now, be careful. Judger here doesn't mean judgmental, right? It really just means that it really means that in your perception of how you now take and organize the information that you have to be able to act on it, right? How are you organizing it? Are you putting more structure into it? Or are you more fluid in your approach? So we're going to get into, a little bit how this shows up on Teams and how this shows up specifically on Cloverleaf. But the important thing is that each letter of the acronym, which represents one of the 4 categories, is on a spectrum. So we might be more in the middle of some areas, and we might be more towards an extreme on others, right? So the more we land in the middle of the spectrum, the more we be able to adapt, the more adaptable we are. Like if we're super J, if we're like all the way over on J, it's a little harder for us to be more spontaneous, right? It's a little bit harder to shift. But for example, people that are a little bit in the middle of the introvert and extrovert. So another assessment that's a little similar to this that I used to use is the Big 5 personality assessment. And they also measure introversion and extroversion. And in a book that I used to use around these types at work, the people that kind of fell in the middle, they really did have a separate category for ambiverts. And ambiverts are like, maybe they're like a 55, right? They're kind of in that middle of extroversion or introversion, either way, right? And so the ambiverts, people that are ambiverts, they will selectively use extroversion when it calls to them. It's easier for them to shift into extroversion based on the situation, right? And they may shift more introverted, again, based on the situation, right? Or there might be certain groups of people that you show up as extrovert. So for example, some people who are ambiverts, they will show up as extroverts with their friends, with people they know, with even their regular work team, but they may show up as introverts in groups where they don't know anybody, right? And so it's really just this more flexibility with where we get our energy source from, right? And so the more we kind of land in the middle of that spectrum, the more we are able to adapt. So for each category, you can look at your own results, and you can also look at your team's results as you start to get into Cloverleaf. I do want to draw your attention to when you're helping people use 16 types on Cloverleaf. I'm going to go into Cloverleaf right now. Oop, I don't want to do that. I want to open it in a new. I'm going to open this in a, yeah. Okay. So when you're on your Cloverleaf profile and you are seeing your own sort of results here, you can obviously help people dig into these types when you're on here, but you can also help people understand their overall type, right? And so you can help people leverage some of this information when you're helping people go through their individual results. But when you're on the team dashboard, and I'm going to just hop onto a team dashboard that has people with mostly balanced results, because we're going to be using that for our next section. I'm going to be going into this team right here. This is sort of a fake team. When you're in here, everything I just described is actually all described here in terms of the high level description of each category. And the way that it obviously lays out in Cloverleaf, it's going to highlight the majority wherever the majority lies, right? And so there is more extroverts on this team. So it's going to highlight in green, the E's are on the outside, the I's are on the inside. And so as you're helping people understand in Cloverleaf, like where people lie, right? And then obviously, they're going to be able to see, different individuals and where they are. Now, just so that it doesn't get confused, there's no sort of like placement on these, like they get placed in the section. In Disc, it's a little bit more like, as when you're closer to the edge or higher in this area, the way the display is here, it's just you're placed in this box based upon your 4-letter category, right? And so when you're helping people learn a little bit about 16 types on Cloverleaf, it's really good to have this visual. I often don't like to use slides as much. I like to stay in the tool because this visual is much more powerful. When I talk about, okay, we're going to talk about how the different sources of energy that people on this team, let's talk about, okay, everybody on the outside, like, what's the experience for you? Like, you can lead powerful conversations from these visuals when you're going through this. So again, I like to stay a lot in the tool. So we're going to break down a little bit more. Again, the extrovert gets one's energy from the outer world, right? From people and activities. They like to be with people, to get people energized. They tend to be outgoing. They tend to have a lot of connections, and they prefer to work in groups. So you can imagine, as an extrovert, when the pandemic hit, and all of a sudden, like, I was not in rooms with humans, it was extremely challenging, right? Because where I was drawing my creativity and my energy was from the energy of others. So I recently started doing on-site training again. It was like I felt like I had like literally been set free from jail, right? So also extroverts sometimes even think out loud. They are highly driven to act, and they may also be impulsive. They may dive in to sort of thinking and acting before it's even time to really act. So sometimes, again, this thinking out loud thing can happen when there's people around or not. We kind of we'll think out loud whether there's anybody in the room or not. But this can be obviously a huge asset. Or obviously it can also be a challenge. There's an area for development here, right? A high drive to act may cause people who are extroverts to move ahead too quickly, right? And so I have a question for you. I'd like for you to share in the chat. So if you're an extrovert, how does this resonate or show up for you on your team right now? So if you're an extrovert, how does this resonate or show up for you, right? Would you say, yeah, I could see this, or what's something that you do maybe that's aligned with this? So pop in the chat. Just want to hear from a few of you. If you're an extrovert, how does this sort of resonate for you?
As you guys are typing, I think I'm 100 in extroversion. So I will give my example. I am very much a talk out loud type of person, to where it's almost embarrassing. I'll shop and I'll make the decisions on what to buy out loud. And then I realize I'm in public. And people probably think, why is she talking? So yeah, it happens a lot. Happens with our team a lot as well. I'm on a different side of the room, but I'll talk out loud and somebody will say, are you talking to me? So yeah, it's becoming, the older I get, the worse it gets, I think. And I look even like a crazier person, but yeah, definitely resonates. It was Kelvin made the comment, all of the above. Yes, very much so. Feel that.
I think I'm like 97 too. So I have a thing where no matter what store I'm in, everybody thinks I work there because I'm just like open to like everybody starts like engaging with me, asking me. Like sometimes I'm like even like you can tell I'm clearly a customer, but like people will still ask me things, right? And because it's just like I wear it on my body, like, oh, talk to me, right?
Mhm.
Um, Someone shared, I've definitely seen a difference in my energy as we've been able to have more face-to-face interactions with patients compared to everything done via phone or email. Yes, absolutely. We could feel it physically. Like people that are extroverts can literally feel it physically when we are in a room with other people. Now, I realize that I'm training with you now, and like again, I can get excited no matter what. But if I was in the physical, if we were all in a room together, like there'd be a whole other level, right, of energy happening and conversation happening, which Zoom just limits us, right? Um, so yeah, and Summer, this is a great observation where Summer noted that they've been a little bit more of an introvert since their role changed, right? So we can over time appreciate more of the opposite in our preferences. It depends, um, it depends, on our situation, right? I've gotten a lot more used to being home now that like I don't work outside the home as much. So I've learned to appreciate it, right? But it took a lot of time, right? So yes, so that's good, a good observation, Anita. That's great. Okay, so we're going to go into introverts. They get one's energy from the inner world, right? They are energized by their ideas and memory, right? And they prefer to work alone. They would prefer to work on their own. They think things through before they act. And their area for development people may get too caught up in ideas and may delay moving forward. So now here's the thing, this is such a value. There was actually some research done, and I believe it was Adam Grant, I could be wrong, around, we always assume extroverts should be the leaders, except they're the ones that won't shut up. And it was really this interesting research about how introverts make some of the most effective leaders because they listen, right? Because they're quiet, more quiet and thoughtful. They prefer to sort of have that perspective. They draw significant energy and enjoyment from their time alone. They process and they see and they think things that extroverts will very quickly jump over. And that ability to really listen, that to actively listen, is a key facet of being an effective leader. And so there are so many ways to leverage introversion in an organization, in a group. And there are also ways that we need to sort of, not, sometimes people will say, oh, well, they're introverted, so I'm not going to go into, or, it's going to be too much to draw it out of them, right? That's not that's a bias. It's not a fair assessment. And we're really missing the value that just because introverts aren't spewing everything out of their mouth like extroverts does not mean we may have to work a little harder. We may have to solicit more information and more feedback from introverts, but we have to take that time and really invest that time in it, right? And so this is so from those of you that are introverts, right? How does some of this resonate with you as well, right? How do you sometimes feel you've been inaccurately labeled, or any kind of insight from you if you're an introvert? If you want to pop that in the chat.
again, while you guys are talking, I'll insert my knowledge of introvert. First of all, being such a high extrovert, I appreciate introverts so much. They really do become the yin to my yang, and they help calm me and really stop and think before I speak. I have a lot to learn from introverts. Um, Kirsten, our co-founder, is an introvert, and if you were to meet her, she's the most outgoing introvert I know. But she used to have her desk facing the wall just so she could get what she could done, done on a regular basis, being around all these people. She loves interacting with people. She loves communicating with people. But she enjoys doing it in the silence of her own home or in the corner of a quiet room or something like that. So it presents very differently. And I think the older that I get and the more knowledge that I learn from all of these types, how much we can really learn from each other and lean into those strengths that I do not. I am terrible about thinking before I speak, and introverts are very systematic on how they say things, and I just appreciate that so much.
Great. Yeah, we have some good shares here. Cassandra shared, I relate to the area for development. I struggle sometimes by getting stuck on things and I can't get the task completed. We also have some comments from multiple people about getting absorbed, right? So time passes, I can't, you have to kind of stop. Um, and yes, Laura shared, yeah, it can be very frustrating when extroverts who aren't listening, but rather just waiting to talk. And, as an extrovert who's also a coach, I've trained myself to self-coach in meetings. So I literally do, the self-coaching usually sounds like shut up, Stephanie. But I do actually, and I always I'll train myself to ask. About 15 years ago, when I was in a leadership workshop, I got very present to this. I trained myself to ask a question because that interrupts me speaking. So I will say, okay, Heidi, what do you think? So as soon as I divert it away, like it helps me shut up. So to ask a question. And so I do that self-coaching so I can not dominate a conversation. Good. Andrea shared, I like both, but definitely prefer to stay at home, right? Sometimes get stuck in research mode and thinking I don't have all the info, especially with the internet, we go into these rabbit holes and we dive in. So I'm giving a little extra attention to the extrovert versus introvert because I think this is one of the ones that sometimes gets most misconstrued, and we have a lack of appreciation sometimes for the opposite. So that's why I'm kind of going a little bit deeper in this area. Awesome shares. Yeah. Yeah, Heidi, good point too. Yeah. So you can get overwhelmed also as you go and dig into that information. It can be like, oh, now what do I do with all this stuff? Right now I have to go and organize it. So now we have to consume the information. So the sensor takes in information from their five senses, right? So a sensor is going to remember details. They're going to dig into facts in order to solve the problem. They have to understand these facts in order to then to see the big picture. Super practical, right? And they learn through hands-on experience. They focus, because they're sometimes focusing so heavily on the facts, they may miss some of the new possibilities, right? Because they may miss the gray areas because sensors are going to be hyper focused on the linear, right? So they may miss some of those more amorphous concepts and ideas because they're kind of drawn almost like a magnet to what are the definitive things, right? Whereas someone who is leaning in towards intuition is taking information based on the big picture, not the small facts. So they're going to first notice the patterns, right? The sensor is going to first notice the detail. The person who is leaning into intuition is going to notice the pattern. They're really good with abstract theories. They lean into their gut instinct, right? They communicate to communicate conclusions, right? They learn through the process of the thinking more than the hands-on work, right? So whereas the sensor may learn by putting all the fact puzzle pieces together, the more intuitive person is going to learn through the sort of fluid thinking process, right? They're more forward looking. Also, they're focused on what's possible, and they'll remember the big picture more than the details. So because they're always like kind of leaning into the future and they're leaning into design thinking, they may miss key details, which is why whenever you're reviewing information as a group, it's awesome to have both a higher S and a higher a higher N together, because you're going to capture all the necessary information to be able to inform a decision, a discussion, a conclusion, right? So again, this is about what we tend to notice first. It doesn't mean that the sensor is never going to see the big picture. It doesn't mean that the person who's more intuitive is never going to see the details. It's just, think of it like a magnet. It's what we tend to get drawn to first when we're consuming information. And now that we've consumed that information in this judgment category, now we've got to make that decision. So the thinker is going to make the decision with the head based on logic, not always thinking of the unique situation, right? They're going to prefer consistent principles. They want logical explanations. They will pick up on inconsistencies very easily. They like pros and cons. They're going to say, okay, we've got this, and we've got that, right? They prefer individual desires, truth over individual desires. So what that means is that sometimes they're going to lean into the facts and not always understand the individual opinion or desire of other folks in a conversation, right? So sometimes when you're really on the spectrum of being a high T, your area for development is that you may appear to be inconsiderate of the people side of things at times. And it's not conscious. So everybody here, I'm sure, has seen the iceberg a visual where a lot of our behavior is unconscious. It's below the surface. It's not conscious. It's not that you're setting out to be inconsiderate. It's that you're so hyper focused on some of the logic based information to help inform the decision that people may perceive it as being inconsiderate, right? And it's not because you are intending to be inconsiderate. So it's just for those of us that are high T's, it's just, again, it's that self-coaching. Remember how I shared my strategy to interrupt my extroversion is to ask a question. So sometimes the strategy for a high T is to solicit and ask for the feedback from a high F. So tell me what you're seeing. Is there something that you're seeing around this that maybe I'm missing? I want to understand. I want to learn, right? And so we have to take a learner mindset when we tend to sort of be more on that other end of the spectrum, right? Because we don't want people to misunderstand our intention. We're trying to make a good decision, right? But at the same time, we also want to be enlightened by some other perspectives that maybe we are missing. Now, as a feeler is going to make the decisions more from the heart. They're going to make values-based decisions, right? And they're going to look at things from the lens of concern for others. And so they can appear compassionate, warm, even sometimes idealistic. They are going to bring a tactful concern for others. They seek harmony, right? They want the best for everyone. They want everybody to win, right? But because they're so others focused, and I use this example also when I'm talking about the difference between thinkers and feelers. Feelers need to have an appreciation for compromise over consensus, right? People who want consensus, they want everybody to agree and everybody to be happy. That's not going to happen. Compromise is we all have to give a little to get a little, right? And so we can't wait around, right, for consensus, right? So the area for development is that people that tend to lean into feeling sometimes is they may miss some of the hard truths, right? And they may want to just seek harmony and avoid conflict at all times. Now, and we just did a webinar around conflict, and I've done a lot of research in the area of conflict, and especially on teams that allow themselves to engage in healthy task conflict. There's two things about conflict when we're avoiding it. One, when we avoid conflict, we're actually creating more and worse conflict, right? You have to think of it like a pressure cooker. Two, we're always perceiving the conversation that could be difficult to be more difficult than it is. So we're always blowing up the fear of the blown up perception is actually what we're responding to. We're not responding to what the conversation actually can be like. We're responding to our perception of the blown up what conflict could be. And the reality is that the most successful teams, performance wise, do allow themselves to engage in healthy task conflict. Conflict can be used as a source of innovation. It can be a source of deepening understanding. We've all had misunderstandings in our personal lives. And even though it was difficult or uncomfortable, if it was someone that was really important to us, usually we've kind of been left with, oh, now I understand something about this person a little bit more. And even though it wasn't pleasant, I have this now deeper understanding, right? And so in these ways of, excuse me, in these ways of trying to understand the other person, we want to be able to consider, right, that conflict isn't all that bad. Okay, so I'm going to stop and ask a question about this. So if you're a thinker, tell me what resonated here for you. If you're a feeler, tell me also what resonated here for you. What do you pick up on the most based upon if you're a thinker or a feeler? So what are you picking up on the most? What most resonated with you in sharing about those two types before we move to judging and perceiving?
Again, as you guys are typing, I'll insert my thoughts. I was actually thinking about a conversation I've had with a colleague recently and how we've approached things, and I knew we approached things very differently, and that's what I appreciate about him the most. I looked to see, I'm like, I bet you this is where we're the most opposite, and we are. Very much a feeler. He's very much a thinker, and I have found myself reaching out to him a few times, like, am I thinking of everything here? Where am I missing the details? And he, and then he has done a good job of then reaching out and saying, okay, why would anybody want to do it? Why, I don't understand why anybody else would want to do it differently. I'm like, well, here's the perspective of someone else, thinking of others. So it's really interesting to see. Yes, it's very visible to see the difference between an extrovert and an introvert. And some of these things you can really see the differences of folks. I think some of these other types, these comparisons of the 16 types, is a little harder to recognize. I think thinkers and feelers, because I'm such a deep feeler, I do see the deep thinkers and how different they are as well. So again, great to have a yin and a yang.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. I don't see anything right now in the chat. So if you do want to keep sharing, do that. I'll backtrack, but let's move forward. All of the feeler descriptions, can we say we are barely one type or the other, depending on the percentage? So when, again, about the spectrum, when you tend to be in the middle, you are going to have more access to both types, right? So it's really about more immediate access, right? So if I am kind of in the middle of the thinker feeler, I'm going to be able to shift and have more access more quickly. If I'm on the other end of the spectrum, it's just that I might have a longer shift time, right? And so it's not about you don't have to put yourself in the box. You can say, hey, I in this particular category, I tend to be in the middle and I'm able to function in both, in both areas based upon the situation, right? And that's really it's the when you get to the middle of the spectrum, it becomes situational in how you show up. The situation determines how you show up. The people, the task at hand, the urgency, whatever it is. So yeah, you can express it however you want. Okay.
Yeah. I'd say I'm not in the middle in thinking and feeling, but I am in sensing and intuition, and I'm even more in perceiving and judging, where we're about to go through now. And it took me a while to figure out my 16 type, like what am I? Because I would shift between the two. I'm like, I could be a little bit of both, whatever. Took a few years, took a little maturity as well to figure out what my type was. But what helped me then decide which shift I could go to was looking at the overall type as well, like diving into what is my 16 type, which one do I go with? Am I more of an ESFP or am I more as an ESJ as that type as well? So, but I'm okay with flipping and kind of going, like maybe this fits both. So yeah, I think that's a really good question.
Yeah, and Nathaniel confirmed that. And what you're sharing, I have an 80 in thinking, and it took a long time to let others explain their feeling or opinion, right? And it does. It just, we're kind of, we have a lot of practice in the areas where we're on the higher end of the spectrum, right? So let's shift to judging versus perceiving. So when we're a judger, we prefer an orderly, controlled life where more decisive and structured and organized. We focus on completing tasks. We do prefer our own structures. So I was a P till I was 35. When I was 35, I became a manager, a leader of other humans, and all of a sudden I had like operations that I had to do. So I was it was either J or die. Like I was either going to have to like flip and shift. And I really and I do pull in from P when I can. But the thing with J's, not only do they prefer structure, they are very partial to their own. So it can be very hard for them to shift into other people's structure. So even two J's together may be in conflict because they're really attached to their structure, right? And so their area for development is sometimes they may miss new information or the need to create and brainstorm. And so what and I'll share with you what this looks like in a team way in a little bit. But again, you want to make sure that you're not what I call rushing to spreadsheet, rushing to listing, right? Rushing to tactics and transaction before you've had necessary conversations. Now, as the perceiver on the other end, they take in new information and they want to keep their options open. So they're more spontaneous, flexible. They seek adaptability versus control. They want to not feel like they're in the Excel spreadsheet. They want to feel like they're in the Miro board, if you've done Miro, right? They want to be more in the creative space, right? They're more open-minded to new ideas and experiences because they're not seeking to order and organize all the time. They're seeking to explore and to understand. Now, their area for development is they may delay decision making because they want to keep exploring, right? And so when you've got some teams of P's and J's, right? You've got a little bit of diversity there in how you want to approach taking in information. Now, when we put all this together in the visual, the layout of the wheel visual gives a team a clear insight into patterns of similarities, of differences. You'll notice that as you go through on Cloverleaf, and as I mentioned, the people, like it'll highlight the majority, and you can see where some of the team patterns are as well. Now, there is a lot more detail in your resource on these things, but I'm going to give you a couple of team scenarios. Again, in the resource, I give you a ton of detail. I actually took some of this information from our Train the Trainer program, where I'm training people to really analyze team dashboards. But here are some several patterns. So I'm going to bring up this team that I mentioned here. Let me just pull this back up. So this team, if you'll notice, they are balanced in many of the areas. So when I say balanced, what I usually mean is that it's no more than 60-40 on any of the aspects of the of 16 types. So in the resource where, and you're in the resource here, let me just go right here. So if you're in the resource here, you're going to notice the balanced extroversion versus introversion, right? So that the thing isn't working right now. Okay, so the balanced trends, you're going to notice there's a lot of information. And in the resource, how I'm speaking to you is as a leader, facilitator, as someone who is examining, looking at a team dashboard, whether you're a manager, whether you're a practitioner, right? No matter what it is, that's how I'm kind of speaking to you, so that when you're looking at a team dashboard, you can position certain balanced trends together. So for example, if you're here and you have a balanced E and a team with E and I, you can position this as a strength or an opportunity for growth, right? To have that combination of people that are driving a conversation to people who are more methodical processors. How does that help? How does that hinder, right? How does that help us? How does that keep us sometimes back, right? Remember that introvert may bring some critical information that can help during, making decisions. Extroverts can also help teams continue to innovate, right? So you can highlight what are the strengths and what are the opportunities for growth when you have that balanced E and I. Now, when you have the balanced sensing and intuitive, you can position this also as a strength or an opportunity for growth, right? So a team that has balance in this area, they're going to capture the most important aspects of concepts or strategies. And by combining the healthy sort of the healthy balance of big picture thinking and then more detailed thinking, teams can really be great at strategic planning and execution, right? Those the more intuitive folks are going to put that bigger picture in place, and the sensors are going to put some of the tactical things in place, right? And so there's some great support though in the resource of how to speak to teams or with teams that have that balance. Balance thinking and feeling, again, this could be a strength or it could be an opportunity for growth, right? When you have teams that have a good balance of thinkers and feelers, you really embody the whole human experience, right? We're kind of getting the whole spectrum. It especially comes in handy when teams are making decisions about performance, about staffing decisions. It also helps when you're able to look at how do we provide feedback, right? Because when we're thinking as a team together, how do we provide feedback to another team or another department, right? You're going to have that combination of, well, we've got to give the facts, but we've also got to consider these people are human, right? And so you're going to have this great balance. And so, again, depending on the situation, you can position it as a strength or an opportunity for growth. When teams have balance, judging, and perceiving, this brings a variety to how a team approaches work getting done. So having a balance in these areas will make sure that you won't get too caught up in just organizing and not ideating, right? So when it comes to setting deadlines, your J's are going to make sure that, hey, we meet that deadline. But the P's, I always encourage the J's to also allow the P's to inject that brainstorm, inject that ideating, right? Teams that are often too high in J, I often say to them, when you don't have enough P's on your team, you have to create a structure for that P energy to come in. So I'll say, you love structure, you love boundaries, set 15 minutes to brainstorm because you're all going to be just rushing to tactics and you need some time to brainstorm. Sometimes when I get excited, my southern accent that I don't have comes out. So all of a sudden the y'all start coming. I did work a lot in Tulsa, Oklahoma, so my y'alls come out, and but I don't know, I just noticed it as I'm speaking. See what happens with extroverts as they keep talking, like they bring in other accents. All right, so
Says the New Yorker.
it's a New Yorker or New Jersey with my y'alls. But what I learned from working in other parts of the country is how to be sometimes gentler, right? So I appreciate my time in Tulsa. Okay, so
appreciate it too.
all right. So there is, again, a ton of information in the resource around more diverse trends, right? So when you've got teams with high extroversion, you've got to help those people be better listeners. They're not even listening to each other, right? And so you often will have a lone one or two extroverts that are like completely not getting heard. So you've got to open that up in a team and say, how is this impacting us? How is this affecting us? Teams that are high in introversion, you've got to support them in being able to solicit information, from having more of a communication strategy. Teams high on introversion may avoid conflict that important things aren't being discussed, right? And you have to coach a highly introverted team into slowly creating practices that are going to help them. You're not going to change them, but you can help them have design practices that are going to help them. Teams that are high on sensing and low on intuition, they can tend to be lower on optimism, and they can miss magic. They can miss possibility. So again, you have to also help them to asking them how they can design some best practices in their own communication to be able to see the big picture. Teams that are high on intuition, they bring great vision to strategic planning, but you may have to help these teams, if you're on a team like this, develop more practices that help us in sort of the execution, right? And or in the data gathering, right? So who are we going to cultivate on our team that's going to bring that data to light, right? And so again, there's some strategies in the resource for working with some of these diverse trends. So teams that are high on thinking with low on feeling, they can sometimes produce an environment that's a little less approachable, less inviting. So you definitely want to guide teams that are high on thinking in that way. Teams that are high on feeling, I realize I'm giving you a lot of information, but I want to also have you have the resource to be able to dig in a little deeper. Teams that are high on feeling, again, they may be ruled by emotion more than strategic thinking. So they also have to be coached into developing some practices that are going to help them make balanced decisions. Teams that are high on judging, I shared with you earlier. I see a lot of teams that are high on J, and I always tell them, I want you to take your agenda, and I want you to put, when you're making a decision or when you're coming up with a new idea, I want you to make sure you put in that 15 minutes of brainstorming. So I will always tell them to include more brainstorming or ideating with boundaries around it. When you have teams that are high on perceiving, there can be some challenges with productivity, accountability. So you want to make sure that people have, again, some structure, some best practices, that they can identify where that impacts them the most. You have to remember this also will depend on the function. So a bunch of graphic designers, right, that need to spend more time creating and ideating and talking about concept, right, with before they execute, right, they might need more of that time, right, whereas a team of compliance officers, right, would be totally different, right? So you also have to take into consideration the function that people are serving in those groups. Now, I also invite you on the team dashboard to dive into the cognitive function pairs, especially when you're giving feedback. So if you click on the cognitive function pair, the two middle letters of your type are the perception and judgment functions, and it gives insight on how these four cognitive functions mentally consume, organize, and decide upon information. As a hot tip, I'm going to tell you, before you give feedback to a person, go and look at their cognitive function pair. And I'm also going to share, I'll share with you a quick resource. When we did a webinar, I think it was in August, around Cloverleaf for leaders. And I'm going to copy this link and I'm going to put it right here. And there is an exercise on how to approach feedback with each of the cognitive function pairs in this resource. And so this can be, a great way to look at how you give feedback, because you're understanding how they mentally consume and how they process that information.